Hello, I'm Morgan Pehme, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, and this is Last Look. Today, our guest is City and State columnist Nicole Gelinas. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Morgan.
You have a very intriguing new column in this issue, saying that the New York City can take a lesson from the New York Yankees' failure. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a tough word, I guess, failure for Yankees fans.
Yeah, I was going to say,
but,
are you a Yankees fan?
Well, I grew up in Boston,
Okay.
like Bill de Blasio.
So we can say failure.
Yeah, but I've lived here for so long now. It's complex. We'll leave it that way.
I'm a Mets fan, so I'm only too happy to use that word.
Okay,
Yes.
but yeah, this is an object lesson in how quickly things can turn around, which is important for a city like New York to absorb because we feel like we're on top, no one can catch up with us. We've survived the financial crisis very well, but that's not a permanent state of affairs. And you look at the Yankees, this was the dynasty starting in the late 1990s, 4 quick championships almost in a row, and then another championship in 2009. This was the team that people said is unbeatable, and here you are, not even getting into the postseason this year. And so there's some lessons for New York and why that is and what that means for city budget, city government.
And you kind of find a correspondence between the way that the team and the city have invested in their own kind of infrastructure, right? Or in their spending has corresponded to each other.
Yeah, and spoke with some of my colleagues who follow the team closely when I was writing this article. Here you have a team that has a payroll of more than $200 million. The only team that comes close is the LA Dodgers. The third team is way back at $170 million. So the team that invariably spends more than almost anyone else in baseball, but yet this spending hasn't worked, at least in the past few years. So you look back at the history, Yankees didn't always spend so much more than everybody else. You look back to 1990, yeah, they spent a lot, but they were spending around $20 million a year, and the exact numbers in the article. But you had another 7 to 12 teams that were either spending more than them, 7 teams, or another 5 teams that were spending almost as much as they were spending. They really started to break away, about 10, 15 years ago and becoming the biggest spender every single year. And a lot of teams' budgets fluctuate. They get a new player, they have to make a big payout to somebody, but the Yankees have just gone steadily up, doubling the payroll, more than doubling the payroll over the past 10 years. Now, you look at the late 1990s, yes, they were spending more, but they also had very good management, very good team of players that they had nurtured. And of course, good luck helps too. The past few years, especially since they bought A-Rod at the very top of the bubble in 2007, the money hasn't helped them and has in fact been a hindrance. You're paying so much for A-Rod, for example, hard to find the resources to hire other players or nurture new talent because you've got these kind of legacy costs, if you will.
And so we see in the 90s, New York City benefits from the Wall Street boom. It justifies us spending so much more money into the 2000s, right? Mayor Bloomberg dramatically increases the size of the city budget along with the city council. We see the Yankees doing the same thing during their boom time. They build a new stadium and everything seems like it's always going to be a sunny day. But now I think that you're arguing that this is a time for us to, both the Yankees and New York City, to kind of exercise some greater economic prudence.
Yep, you look at the city budget, the same factors that were telling the Yankees to be so confident in spending so much money and in investing in the new stadium. You had the tech boom of the 90s, so people had more money, they could spend more on tickets. The advertisers would pay more for the rights because the viewers were wealthier. And then you had the real estate and the credit booms of the 2000s. So the same factors that we're saying to New York, you don't have to worry that the cost of public pensions is going up so much. You don't have to worry that the cost of public employee health care is going up so much because we always have enough money to cover it, and there's always more where that came from. And then credit bubble, real estate bubble obviously burst from 2006 to 2008. Now New York is stuck with these costs, pension costs for past performance, just like the Yankees are stuck with costs for A-Rod's kind of illusory past performance. And it's hard for the city to invest in new infrastructure, public services, when it's paying for all of these costs that it incurred in the past. And unfortunately, the Yankees this year have been cutting back. They cut the payroll down below what it was opening day. The organization wants to be under the luxury cap. It's a lot harder for New York City to cut back its budget. It's almost impossible to change past pensions. All the labor agreements are expired. De Blasio and Lota, obviously there's some difference there about what they would do with the expired contracts, but the unions shouldn't be so sure that de Blasio will give them their retroactive raise. In the end, the numbers and the numbers, and you may want to spend more, but if you don't have the money, you have to cut back. And that's exactly what the Yankees are finally saying. New York City, hopefully starting to say it too.
Well, in baseball, there's a really stark objectivity, right? You either win or you lose. And so we can see that there has been a day of reckoning, in a way, over the last couple seasons for the Yankees, that this bloated payroll couldn't last in perpetuity, right? And
Yep.
and now, the Robinson Cano, he wants a 10-year, $310 million contract. And I know that you've been very critical of the possibility of retroactive raises and putting too much money into paying the unions and the pension costs. And so it seems like here we're at that kind of same juncture, right? The Yankees could either, again, lay out what could possibly be a bloated contract, or it could be a huge success. And the city could either put a bunch of money retroactively into the unions, which could be great, or it could have negative long-term ramifications. Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Yeah, particularly since with a retroactive raise, you're paying for work already done in the past. And so the person can't be more productive in the past. Bloomberg always says, or he said, with I guess 2.5 months left, is unlikely he'll get deals with these unions, but you never know, that they have to pay for raises with productivity. But you can't do that for things that happened 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago at this point. Same risk with the Yankees, that if you pay for a long-term contract with a superstar player, maybe their best work is in the past. I mean, certainly happened with A-Rod. You don't want that to happen with other players as well, but the city faces the same issue. You're paying either for pensions or for retroactive raises, paying for things that have already been done.
So you're saying that both the city and the Yankees have to make their decisions moving forward based upon the current economic environment.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's a very compelling or interesting argument. I'm sure that it will spark a great deal of controversy. Just to move to a different subject for a moment, what do you think about the mayoral race? It seems like Joe Lota is slipping even farther behind in the polls. Why do you think that is?
Well, anything can happen. As Lota pointed out, de Blasio was not the front runner at this point either, with this number of weeks left in the primary season. But Lota has a good message to give to the voters. He just has to do it. He doesn't seem to want to talk about his tenure at the MTA, even though it was successful. He helped the MTA recover very quickly after Sandy. Transportation is very important to the future of the city. He should be talking about what's his investment plan for transit, for transportation. How would he work with the state, because he has a good relationship with the governor, something that he doesn't talk very much about. He might have a better relationship with the governor than de Blasio would. De Blasio wants the governor to raise taxes. Maybe Lota would want to work with the governor on some kind of transportation plan. So these are all things he could be saying. Instead, he seems to be focusing on, one, how he's the same as de Blasio, which is a dangerous argument to make. If he's the same, then people might just go with the guy who's ahead. And he also seems to be pushing some of what he did during the Giuliani era, particularly, I saw your story on his 9/11 performance. I'm sure he is that shows what a good leader he was, but it's very tricky because a lot of people don't want to dwell on 9/11, and he may be pushing people away who, it still feels painful for them to be talking about that. So he should also maybe be looking at the future rather than the past and showing how these things can help him in the future.
When you're talking about the similarities between de Blasio and Lota that Lota's been drawing, I see that you're alluding to his first commercial of the general election cycle. And I felt that was a perplexing choice too. It seems like you said about Lota's message. I've had a difficulty kind of pinning down what exactly is Lota's message, and I felt it was particularly bizarre that Lota doesn't even talk in his first ad. It's like for most New Yorkers, he's an unknown quantity, and yet it seems like they're hiding him. What are they waiting for?
Yeah, and that's really the third thing is this could change obviously in the next month or so, but when he does talk, he's been attacking de Blasio on the going to Nicaragua, supporting the Sandinistas, on the honeymooning in Cuba. Of course, de Blasio shouldn't have honeymooned in Cuba, but this is also a dangerous approach to take. As de Blasio says, it's 2013. A lot of people see these things as in the past. They may be right and they may be wrong, but it's hard to see a winning campaign based around people worried that de Blasio is a Marxist. So again, you're right, he needs to talk, he needs to say what are his ideas, not just transportation and transit, how would he keep the city safe, how would he work with the police department, how would he protect the budget better than de Blasio would do. So kind of bread and butter, not so much pulling to people's fear, whether it's about Marxism or crime, but really looking to what people are hoping to see from their next mayor.
Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And again, a month left, so he still has an opportunity to do these things. He just has to start doing them.
We'll see how it plays out.
Thanks, Morgan.
And that's it for this episode of Last Look. For more episodes, please join us on the web at cityandstateny.com.